Elena Martinez had always been known for her quiet strength among the resistance fighters in the mountains of her war-torn country. At 28, she carried herself with the poise of someone who had seen too much too young, yet never lost hope. The small scar on her left temple told of a childhood accident, but the determination in her dark eyes spoke of battles fought and won in the shadows of conflict. The resistance camp nestled between rocky outcrops and dense pine forests had been her home for 3 years. Here, among the 47 fighters who had become her chosen family, Elena served as a communications specialist. Her gift for languages and codes made her invaluable to their cause. She could intercept enemy transmissions, decode military communications, and, most importantly, she could create unbreakable ciphers that kept their operations secret from the occupying forces. The morning that would change everything started like any other. Elena woke before dawn, as was her habit, and made her way to the communications tent. The portable radio equipment hummed softly in the pre-dawn darkness, and she settled into her routine of monitoring enemy frequencies. The coffee was bitter and cold, but it helped her focus as she listened through the static for any useful intelligence. Colonel Martinez, no relation despite the shared surname, had been planning their most ambitious operation yet. Intelligence suggested that a high-ranking enemy official would be traveling through the valley below in 3 days. This official carried information that could turn the tide of their struggle, details about supply routes, troop movements, and, most crucially, the locations of other resistance cells that had gone silent in recent weeks. Elena's role in the operation was critical. She would pose as a local villager and position herself at the checkpoint where the convoy would stop for inspection. Hidden in her clothing would be a miniature recording device, no larger than a button, designed to capture conversations from the official's vehicle. The plan required her to get close enough to plant the device while appearing completely innocent. As she prepared for the mission, Elena reflected on the journey that had brought her here. She had been a university student studying linguistics when the war began. Her professors had praised her natural ability with languages and her innovative approach to cryptography. But, when the bombs started falling on her city and her younger brother disappeared during a raid, academic pursuits became a luxury she could no longer afford. The resistance had found her, or perhaps she had found them. Either way, her skills with codes and languages made her recruitment inevitable. She learned to shoot, to fight, and to survive in the wilderness, but her greatest weapon remained her mind. The codes she created had saved countless lives, allowing resistance cells to communicate without detection. But this mission was different. The stakes were higher than ever before, and the margin for error was virtually non-existent. If she was caught, it wouldn't just mean her own death, it would expose the entire network she had worked so hard to protect. The enemy had become increasingly sophisticated in their counterintelligence efforts, and several resistance members had been captured in recent months. Elena spent hours preparing for every possible scenario. She memorized the layout of the checkpoint, studied the patrol schedules, and practiced her cover story until it became second nature. She was Maria Santos, a young woman from the nearby village who sold hand-woven textiles to travelers. Her basket would contain legitimate goods, carefully selected to support her disguise, along with the hidden recording device. The night before the mission, Elena sat by the small fire in the center of camp, surrounded by her fellow fighters. These people had become more than comrades, they were her family in every way that mattered. There was Carlos, the gruff former soldier who had taught her to handle explosives with the precision of a surgeon. Maria Elena, barely 19 but already a crack shot with a rifle, who reminded Elena of her lost brother with her quick smile and fearless attitude. And there was Lieutenant Santos, the quiet man who led their intelligence operations with a combination of ruthless efficiency and deep compassion for his people. He had been the one to first recognize Elena's potential, and, under his guidance, she had developed from a frightened student into one of their most valuable assets. Their relationship had grown beyond professional respect into something deeper, though neither had dared to voice their feelings in such uncertain times. As the fire burned low, Lieutenant Santos pulled Elena aside for a final briefing. In the privacy of his tent, he went over the mission details one more time, but his usual professional demeanor cracked slightly as they spoke. The weight of sending her into such danger was clearly affecting him, though he tried to hide his concern behind tactical discussions and contingency plans. The recording device was smaller than she had expected, no bigger than a coat button but infinitely more sophisticated. It could record up to 6 hours of conversation and transmit the data to a receiver hidden in the rocks above the checkpoint. The technology was cutting edge, supplied by sympathetic allies from across the border who supported their cause. Elena examined the device carefully, noting its weight and texture. It would be sewn into the lining of her vest, positioned so that it could pick up conversations from several feet away while remaining completely hidden. The receiver would capture the transmission automatically, eliminating the need for her to retrieve the device personally and reducing the risk of exposure. But, as she held the tiny piece of technology, Elena felt the full weight of responsibility settling on her shoulders. This mission could provide the intelligence breakthrough they desperately needed, or it could be the mistake that brought down everything they had built. The enemy had grown more ruthless in their pursuit of resistance fighters, and capture increasingly meant not just death, but torture designed to extract every piece of useful information. The tactical briefing continued late into the night, with Lieutenant Santos walking Elena through every aspect of the plan. They discussed escape routes, emergency signals, and backup procedures in case something went wrong. But, despite their thorough preparation, they both knew that once she walked into that checkpoint, she would be entirely on her own. As Elena finally returned to her sleeping bag in the early hours of the morning, her mind raced with the details of the upcoming mission. She thought about the code she had been developing, a new cipher based on an ancient linguistic pattern she had discovered in her university research. It was more complex than anything she had created before, virtually unbreakable by conventional methods, and she planned to use it to encode any intelligence they gathered from the mission. The irony wasn't lost on her that her academic background, which had once seemed so removed from the harsh realities of war, had become her greatest asset in the fight for freedom. The same skills she had used to analyze dead languages were now keeping her people alive, and the same mind that had once dreamed of teaching in peaceful classrooms was now focused on outsmarting enemy intelligence officers. Sleep came fitfully, filled with dreams of checkpoints and codes, of success and failure intertwined. Elena woke several times throughout the night, her subconscious mind still working through the various scenarios she might face in the coming day. Each time she closed her eyes, she saw the faces of her fellow fighters, depending on her to succeed. The pre-dawn hours brought a strange calm. Elena rose early and went through her morning routine with methodical precision. She checked her equipment one final time, rehearsed her cover story, and mentally prepared herself for the performance of her life. In a few hours, she would walk into the valley below as Maria Santos, textile seller, but she would carry with her the hopes and lives of everyone in the resistance camp above. The morning sun cast long shadows across the valley as Elena made her way down the winding mountain path toward the checkpoint. She moved with the unhurried pace of someone who belonged in these hills, her woven basket balanced expertly on her hip and her simple peasant dress blending perfectly with the rural landscape. Every step was calculated to appear natural while bringing her closer to one of the most dangerous moments of her life. The checkpoint came into view as she rounded a bend in the path. It was exactly as her intelligence had described, a temporary structure of concrete barriers and metal fencing that controlled the only road through this part of the valley. 2 guard towers flanked the main gate, and she could see at least 6 soldiers moving around the compound. More concerning were the 2 armored vehicles parked nearby, suggesting that security had been increased for the expected convoy. Elena paused at a small shrine by the roadside, crossing herself and offering a silent prayer as any local woman might do. The gesture served multiple purposes. It reinforced her cover identity while giving her time to observe the checkpoint more carefully. She noted the positions of the guards, the timing of their patrols, and, most importantly, the layout of the inspection area where vehicles would be required to stop. As she approached the checkpoint, Elena's heart rate increased, but her breathing remained steady and controlled. Years of training and natural discipline helped her maintain the relaxed posture of someone who had made this journey countless times before. She adjusted the strap of her basket and continued forward, mentally reviewing every detail of her cover story. The first guard who noticed her was young, probably no more than 20, with the nervous energy of someone still new to his position. He called out a greeting in the local dialect, which Elena returned with the appropriate mixture of politeness and wariness that would be expected from a village woman. She explained that she was traveling to the market in the next town, hoping to sell her textiles to the travelers who passed through. The guard examined her identification papers, which were expertly forged but designed to show the appropriate wear and aging of genuine documents. Elena answered his questions with the patient resignation of someone accustomed to such delays, providing details about her family, her village, and her small business. She even pulled out several pieces of cloth from her basket, explaining the traditional patterns and techniques used to create them. What Elena couldn't have anticipated was the thoroughness of the checkpoint's security procedures. As she waited for her papers to be returned, a senior officer approached and announced that all civilians would need to remain in the area until after an important convoy passed through. This was both a setback and an opportunity. It meant her mission window would remain open, but it also meant extended exposure to scrutiny. The waiting area was a small concrete building with wooden benches and no privacy. Elena found herself sharing the space with several other travelers, an elderly man with a cart of vegetables, a woman with 2 young children, and a merchant carrying samples of leather goods. She engaged in the small talk that would be expected, learning about crop prices and road conditions while carefully avoiding any topics that might reveal her true identity. As the hours passed, Elena became aware of increased activity around the checkpoint. More soldiers arrived, and she could see them setting up additional security measures along the road. Radio chatter increased, though she couldn't make out the specific communications from her position. Most concerning was the arrival of a mobile communication unit, which suggested that the enemy was taking extra precautions with their transmissions during the convoy's passage. The recording device hidden in her vest remained inactive, waiting for Elena to trigger it when the target vehicle arrived. She had memorized the physical description of the enemy official and his likely vehicle, but she also knew that convoy compositions could change at the last minute for security reasons. Her success would depend on correctly identifying her target among what might be several similar vehicles. Around midday, Elena noticed a commotion among the guards. A motorcycle courier had arrived with what appeared to be updated orders, and she watched as the checkpoint commander gathered his subordinates for a brief meeting. Their body language suggested urgency, and Elena wondered if there had been a change in the convoy's schedule or route. Her question was answered 20 minutes later when the guard announced that the convoy had been delayed and wouldn't arrive until late afternoon. This presented new challenges. The longer she remained at the checkpoint, the greater the risk of someone noticing something unusual about her story or behavior. She would need to maintain her cover for several additional hours while remaining ready to execute her mission at a moment's notice. Elena used the additional time to study the checkpoint's routines more carefully. She noted which guards were most observant, where the communication equipment was located, and how the vehicle inspection process typically unfolded. She also identified several potential escape routes in case the mission went wrong, though she hoped such contingencies wouldn't be necessary. The other civilians waiting with her gradually became more restless as the afternoon wore on. The woman with children was particularly stressed, worried about reaching her destination before dark. Elena offered to share some food from her basket, using the gesture to further reinforce her cover while also demonstrating the kind of community spirit that would be expected from a village woman. As evening approached, Elena finally heard the distant rumble of heavy vehicles. The guards immediately became more alert, taking positions and checking their weapons. She could see headlights in the distance, moving slowly along the winding road toward their position. Her pulse quickened, but she forced herself to maintain the appearance of mild curiosity rather than intense focus. The convoy consisted of 5 vehicles, 2 armored cars at the front and rear, with 3 identical black sedans in the middle. Elena's intelligence had suggested that the target official would be traveling in the middle vehicle of such an arrangement, but she couldn't be certain without closer observation. As the convoy approached the checkpoint, she carefully activated the recording device, feeling the barely perceptible warmth it generated against her skin. The first part of the inspection process was routine. The convoy commander presented his credentials to the checkpoint officers, and Elena could see them examining travel documents and conducting radio confirmations. But then, something unexpected happened. One of the sedan's doors opened, and a man in an expensive civilian suit stepped out to speak with the checkpoint commander. Elena recognized him immediately from the intelligence photographs. General Konstantin Volkov, one of the enemy's most senior intelligence officers, was traveling in this convoy. His presence elevated the importance of her mission exponentially. This man had access to information about not just local resistance activities, but the broader strategic picture across the entire region. Moving as casually as possible, Elena repositioned herself to get closer to the vehicles while maintaining the appearance of simply watching the proceedings with normal civilian curiosity. The recording device was now active and should be capturing any conversations within its range, but she wanted to maximize its effectiveness by reducing the distance to her targets. General Volkov was speaking rapidly with the checkpoint commander, clearly frustrated about something. Elena couldn't make out the specific words, but his tone suggested urgency and possibly anger. She noticed that he kept checking his watch and looking back toward the vehicles, as if concerned about delays to his schedule. The conversation continued for several minutes before Volkov returned to his vehicle. Elena thought the convoy might be preparing to leave, but, instead, more officials emerged from the other sedans. It appeared that an impromptu meeting was taking place right there at the checkpoint, potentially providing her with access to far more valuable intelligence than originally anticipated. As the enemy officials continued their discussion, Elena realized that she was witnessing something extraordinary. The recording device was capturing what appeared to be a high-level planning session involving multiple senior officers. If the intelligence proved valuable, this single mission could provide the resistance with insights into enemy operations across the entire theater. But success was still far from guaranteed. Elena remained acutely aware that discovery would mean not just her own death, but the exposure of the entire resistance network. As she maintained her patient vigil among the other waiting civilians, she knew that the next few minutes would determine whether this mission became a breakthrough victory or a devastating catastrophe. The impromptu meeting between the enemy officials continued for nearly an hour, with Elena maintaining her position among the other waiting civilians while the recording device captured every word within range. She forced herself to appear mildly bored by the delay, occasionally shifting position or checking her basket while carefully monitoring the conversations taking place near the vehicles. General Volkov's voice carried clearly in the evening air as he discussed what sounded like coordinated operations across multiple sectors. Elena caught fragments about supply routes, prisoner transfers, and something called Operation Clearwater that seemed to involve a major offensive planned for the following month. The intelligence value of what she was recording grew with each passing minute. As darkness began to fall, portable lights were set up around the checkpoint, casting harsh shadows that worked to Elena's advantage by making individual faces harder to distinguish. She had gradually moved closer to the vehicles by pretending to help the woman with children keep track of her restless youngsters, a natural gesture that brought her within optimal range of the recording device. The conversation took a concerning turn when one of the subordinate officers mentioned recent resistance activity in the northern mountains. Elena's blood ran cold as she realized they were discussing her own unit's area of operations. The enemy seemed to have more intelligence about resistance movements than anyone had suspected, and she listened with growing alarm as they discussed plans to clean out suspected safe houses and eliminate what they called terrorist cells. General Volkov was particularly interested in reports about a female operative who had been intercepting their communications. The description was vague enough that it could apply to several resistance fighters, but Elena realized with growing unease that they were actively hunting for someone with her exact skill set. The enemy had connected several previously separate incidents and were beginning to understand the scope of the resistance's intelligence capabilities. The recording device continued its work, but Elena knew that every additional minute at the checkpoint increased her risk of discovery. Her cover story could withstand casual scrutiny, but if anyone decided to conduct a more thorough background check, the false identity would quickly unravel. She began to mentally prepare escape routes and contingency plans while maintaining her outward appearance of patient waiting. The situation became more complicated when one of the checkpoint guards approached the group of waiting civilians and announced that they would all need to present their identification again for enhanced security verification. Elena's forged papers were excellent, but they hadn't been designed to withstand the kind of detailed examination that enhanced security might involve. As the guard collected documents from the other civilians, Elena noticed that General Volkov had taken a personal interest in the process. He was standing near his vehicle, observing the identification check with the attention of someone who understood counterintelligence procedures. If he decided to personally examine her papers or ask detailed questions about her background, her mission could end in capture or death. The elderly man with the vegetable cart was questioned first, and Elena watched as the guards verified his documents against some kind of database using their mobile communication equipment. The process was more thorough than the routine checks conducted earlier, suggesting that security protocols had been upgraded in response to recent resistance activities. When her turn came, Elena presented her identification with the calm resignation of someone accustomed to such procedures. She answered questions about her village, her family, and her business with consistent details that matched her forged background. But she could feel General Volkov's eyes on her as she spoke, and she sensed that something about her had caught his attention. The questioning continued longer than it had for the other civilians. The guard asked about her travel schedule, her customers, and even specific details about the textile patterns in her basket. Elena provided detailed answers, drawing on her extensive preparation and her genuine knowledge of local crafts to support her cover story. But then, General Volkov stepped forward and asked a question that made Elena's heart skip a beat. He inquired about her family name, noting that Martinez was uncommon in this particular region. Elena explained that her late husband had been from a neighboring province, which was part of her prepared background, but the general's continued interest suggested he wasn't entirely satisfied with her explanation. The recording device had now captured over 2 hours of high-level enemy communications, far exceeding the mission's original objectives. But Elena realized that her greatest challenge wasn't completing the intelligence gathering, it was getting herself and the recorded information safely back to the resistance base. Discovery at this point would not only cost her life but would also ensure that the valuable intelligence never reached her commanders. General Volkov asked to examine some of the textiles in her basket, and Elena complied with the nervous politeness appropriate for a simple village woman confronted by such a high-ranking official. He handled the cloth pieces carefully, asking questions about the traditional patterns and weaving techniques. His questions were knowledgeable enough to suggest either genuine interest or sophisticated training in local customs. As the examination continued, Elena became aware of increased radio chatter among the soldiers. Something was clearly happening that had put the entire checkpoint on higher alert. She caught fragments of communications mentioning suspicious activity and possible infiltration, though she couldn't determine if these referred to her or some other security concern. The breakthrough moment came when General Volkov's aide approached with an urgent message. Elena couldn't overhear the specific content, but the general's reaction suggested significant developments elsewhere that required his immediate attention. He handed the textile samples back to Elena with what might have been either dismissal or continued suspicion, then returned to his vehicle for what appeared to be an important communication session. Elena sensed that her window of opportunity was closing rapidly. The convoy would likely resume its journey soon, and the checkpoint would return to normal operations. She needed to find a way to leave the area without arousing further suspicion, but she also needed to ensure that the recording device had captured everything possible from the extended meeting. The solution came from an unexpected source. The woman with children approached the guards to request permission to leave, explaining that her children were hungry and tired and that she had family waiting in the next town. Her request triggered a general discussion about releasing the detained civilians, since the convoy's security requirements had been satisfied. Elena joined her voice to the woman's request, explaining that she had hoped to reach the market before it closed and that she had a long walk ahead of her. The guard who had originally processed her paperwork seemed sympathetic, and, after a brief consultation with his superior, he announced that the civilians would be released. As Elena gathered her belongings and prepared to leave, she caught one final exchange between General Volkov and his subordinates. They were discussing plans to increase patrols in the mountain regions and to offer substantial rewards for information about resistance activities. More concerning was a reference to a new enhanced interrogation facility being established specifically for captured resistance fighters. The recording device automatically shut down as Elena moved beyond its effective range, having captured nearly 3 hours of unprecedented intelligence. But she was acutely aware that her challenges were far from over. The journey back to the resistance base would take her through terrain that might already be under increased surveillance, and she would need to avoid any patrols that might connect her to the checkpoint encounter. Elena began the long walk back toward the mountains, maintaining the unhurried pace of a woman returning home from an unsuccessful market trip. But, beneath her calm exterior, her mind was racing with the implications of what she had recorded. The intelligence she carried could save countless resistance lives and potentially change the course of their struggle, but only if she could deliver it safely to her commanders. The darkness that had helped conceal her activities at the checkpoint now became both ally and enemy as she navigated the treacherous mountain paths. Elena knew these trails intimately, but she also knew that enemy patrols had been increasingly active in the area. Every shadow could hide a threat, and every sound might herald discovery. As she climbed higher into the mountains, Elena began to implement the security protocols she had memorized for such situations. She varied her route, doubled back to check for followers, and used natural landmarks to confirm that she wasn't being tracked. The recording device remained hidden in her clothing, its precious cargo of intelligence representing both hope and danger for everyone she cared about. The mountain paths that Elena knew so well seemed different in the darkness, transformed by shadows and the weight of the intelligence she carried. Every step took her further from the checkpoint and closer to safety, but she remained acutely aware that enemy patrols had been increased throughout the region. The recording device hidden in her vest contained information that could reshape their understanding of enemy operations, but only if she could deliver it safely. 3 hours into her journey, Elena encountered her first serious obstacle. The sound of vehicles on a nearby road forced her to take cover behind a rocky outcrop while a military patrol passed below. She counted at least 2 trucks and what sounded like an armored vehicle, moving slowly with searchlights sweeping the surrounding terrain. The patrol's presence this far into the mountains confirmed that enemy operations had indeed been expanded. As the patrol sounds faded into the distance, Elena continued her ascent, but with heightened caution. She began to use the emergency protocols established for high-risk missions, taking a longer but more secure route that avoided the most obvious paths. The detour would add several hours to her journey, but the intelligence she carried was too valuable to risk on a direct approach. The recording device had captured conversations that revealed the true scope of enemy planning. Operation Clearwater wasn't just a local offensive, it was a coordinated campaign designed to eliminate resistance activity across the entire northern region. The enemy had identified key supply routes, safe houses, and communication networks with alarming accuracy. Most disturbing was their knowledge about specific resistance fighters, including detailed descriptions that could only have come from intensive surveillance or captured operatives. Elena's mind raced as she processed the implications of what she had learned. The resistance leadership needed this intelligence immediately to begin implementing countermeasures and evacuation procedures. But she also realized that the enemy's knowledge of their operations was far more comprehensive than anyone had suspected. There might be infiltrators within the resistance network, or the enemy's intelligence capabilities had been dramatically underestimated. As dawn approached, Elena reached a predetermined checkpoint where resistance scouts maintained a hidden observation post. She approached carefully, using the established recognition signals to identify herself to the sentries. The relief in her chest was immense when familiar voices responded with the correct countersigns, confirming that she had reached friendly territory. The scout team leader was Miguel Santos, a grizzled veteran who had been fighting in these mountains since the beginning of the conflict. His weathered face showed immediate concern when Elena explained the urgency of her intelligence and the increased enemy activity she had observed during her return journey. He immediately dispatched runners to alert the main camp while organizing additional security for Elena's final approach. The last leg of the journey to the resistance base took place under heavy escort, with scouts positioned along the route and constant radio communication to ensure they weren't being followed or walking into an ambush. Elena appreciated the precautions, but she also understood that such elaborate security measures would be noticed by enemy surveillance if they were monitoring the area. When Elena finally reached the resistance camp, she was immediately escorted to Lieutenant Santos and Colonel Martinez for debriefing. The intelligence officers worked through the night, analyzing the recorded conversations and cross-referencing the information with their existing knowledge of enemy operations. What they discovered exceeded their most optimistic expectations for the mission's value. General Volkov's conversations had revealed not only the details of Operation Clearwater but also information about enemy command structures, supply schedules, and communication protocols. Perhaps most valuable were references to other resistance groups in neighboring regions, some of which had been presumed lost but were apparently still active and under enemy surveillance. But the intelligence also brought disturbing news. The enemy's knowledge of resistance activities was far more detailed than anyone had suspected. They possessed accurate maps of safe routes, knew the identities of key resistance leaders, and had developed sophisticated countermeasures designed specifically to neutralize the resistance's technical advantages. The upcoming Operation Clearwater was planned as a decisive blow that would cripple resistance activities across the entire region. Elena's role in the analysis was crucial because she had been present during the conversations and could provide context that might not be apparent from the recordings alone. She helped identify the various speakers, explained the significance of certain references, and provided insights into the enemy's apparent priorities based on their tone and body language during the discussions. The strategic implications were profound. The resistance would need to evacuate several compromised locations immediately, change communication protocols, and warn other resistance groups about the planned offensive. More challenging was the question of how the enemy had acquired such detailed intelligence. The possibility of infiltration within their own ranks had to be seriously considered. Lieutenant Santos took Elena aside for a private conversation after the initial debriefing session. His professional mask slipped as he expressed his relief at her safe return and his admiration for her successful completion of such a dangerous mission. But he also shared his concerns about what the intelligence revealed regarding the enemy's capabilities and the security of their own operations. The recording device was carefully examined by the Resistance's technical specialists, who confirmed that it had captured over 3 hours of high-quality audio. The conversations included not only General Volkov's strategic discussions but also detailed tactical planning by his subordinates. The intelligence bonanza provided insights into enemy thinking at multiple levels of command. But Elena's success also raised new questions about future operations. The enemy was clearly aware that their communications were being intercepted, and they were actively hunting for the resistance operatives responsible. Elena's description of General Volkov's personal interest in her identification suggested that the enemy might be closer to identifying key resistance assets than anyone had realized. The resistance leadership faced difficult decisions about how to use the intelligence Elena had gathered. Acting on the information too quickly might reveal that they had intercepted the enemy conversations, potentially compromising future intelligence operations. But waiting too long could allow Operation Clearwater to proceed as planned, with devastating consequences for resistance groups throughout the region. Elena's mission had succeeded beyond all expectations, but it also marked a turning point in the conflict. The enemy's increased sophistication and their apparent infiltration of resistance networks meant that the nature of the struggle was changing. The resistance would need to adapt quickly to survive the new challenges revealed by Elena's intelligence gathering. As Elena finally allowed herself to rest after more than 36 hours of continuous alertness, she reflected on the weight of what she had accomplished. The intelligence she had gathered could save hundreds of lives and potentially change the course of their fight for freedom. But she also understood that her success had likely increased the danger she faced as an individual target of enemy counterintelligence efforts. The recording device had been small and unremarkable, hidden in plain sight among the mundane details of her cover identity. But the intelligence it contained represented one of the most significant breakthroughs in the Resistance's history. Elena had demonstrated that sometimes the most powerful weapons were not guns or explosives, but information and the courage to gather it under the most dangerous circumstances. The mission's success established Elena as one of the Resistance's most valuable assets, but it also meant that future operations would need to account for the enemy's heightened awareness of their capabilities. The War of Shadows and intelligence had entered a new phase, and Elena would play a crucial role in determining whether the Resistance could adapt quickly enough to survive the challenges ahead. As dawn broke over the mountain camp, Elena knew that her successful mission was both an ending and a beginning. She had proven that even the enemy's most secure communications could be penetrated with careful planning and exceptional courage. But she had also learned that the price of freedom would be higher than anyone had imagined, and that the fight ahead would test not just their military capabilities, but their ability to protect the networks and relationships that made their resistance possible.